So when you look at what we talked about earlier on today, and the latest and greatest from Microsoft, and Microsoft says, and I quote at the Insider Dev Tour, Teams is the new interface for Microsoft. And when we talked about it on our show, about Microsoft saying, well, not Microsoft, we're coining the phrase that Teams is the everything source. So wherever you start, Teams is the answer. And it's such a huge departure from what we know as traditional information management, and also what we think a team strategy would work for you. And why we have both agreed to split what we feel the team's approach is, because that's really around what is there and what's not there, and also what we seem to feel is the right strategy when you start looking at teams. Because as much as we think that Teams is just this really cool Electron app that sits there and I can send a message and it's a supersized version of Skype, there's a lot that happens in the background. Like, can we talk about private channels?
You can talk about them, just not how they work.
Okay. So yes, private channels is coming for those that are interested. We'll talk a little bit about the technical considerations on the back end of Teams when you start looking at how to augment your information management strategy utilizing Teams. Because in the old days it was SharePoint, right? That's what we would. We put a document into a document library and we collaborate around that. Whereas with Teams it's very, very much different, and we were speaking about it last night. And when I realized he was going to be, I thought, well, I might as well get him to share his opinions on what we'll be talking about today. So Lorian is, hey.
Otherwise, everyone else in the world, you just steal my IP. It's all good.
It's not, I actually changed your slides. People process paper. In today's world, it's a little bit different. When we start looking at how the structure of information is actually managed inside of an organization. And as traditional knowledge management practitioners, we go with this model. So information architecture is really about users. So what do they do in the organization? Context is really around the processes and the strategy of the organization, and then content. And what that was all based on what we call a work object. Here's a document that comes in and people work with it. In today's world, when it comes to Teams, it's very different. So think about a marketing company. I have to think about Pfizer. Let me use Pfizer as an example. So Pfizer has come up with 2 crazy wonder drugs, and chances are they're going to come up with a 3rd one. And where do they get that information from? How do they go about running some sort of incubator in the organization to come up with cool stuff to do, right? And normally in the old days, you get together in a room and you had a conversation, someone whiteboard things and they write on the whiteboard, and someone takes a picture and then they create a document, and then that's when they start working with the repository. In today's world, I'm an employee of Pfizer and my mate's down the corridor, and I send him a message in Teams. Hey, what do you think about the next wonder drug? And we have that conversation, and that conversation goes further, and generally we have this team called Innovation Hub, and we communicate there, and all that information is stored there, and then we create the document. And for me as a knowledge management person, it's just throwing everything out the window, because I can have a sales team, and then I can have a sales and marketing team, and then I can have a marketing and sales team, and they're all the same. And that's where I get to how many Office 365 groups did you have?
9,000.
9,000 Office 365.
So 10,000.
Oh, 10,000. And this is where everything just goes out the window.
So, metadata. Who here uses metadata in Teams? Oh, sorry, in SharePoint. Isn't it a wonderful thing? Who here hates folders? So, I think it was 2017 at MVP Summit. Jeff Teeper, who's the corporate vice president of SharePoint, the guy who invented it back in 2001, basically his opening comment to us was, we give up. We've tried to do metadata for 15 years. Because anybody who's used SharePoint for at least 15 years knows that the metadata functionality has not changed. This is, that's the SharePoint, so I've got metadata, I can do these things. But, there we go, I'm in the Files tab in Teams. No metadata, it's gone. Now, that being said, this deck needs to be updated soon because, and this is public, there is actually metadata coming to Teams, to the Files tab. So that will alleviate that problem, kind of. Because then you have this wonderful thing where a lot of people still prefer to work called File Explorer. There's no metadata there. None. And I've actually...
So I'd like to interject here.
I'll turn the mic off for the next 15 minutes, yeah?
No. So, File Explorer. I think File Explorer is the hidden gem, right, to getting people to use Teams. So how do you get people to use Teams? I mean, Teams is this new interface, right? Where do people live? And Microsoft talks about this quite often. The new messaging is, we want to take enablement of technology to where people live. So you want to get people to use Teams, get them to use Windows Explorer with OneDrive first. Does that?
Which kind of leads us to the next challenge that we have. Has anybody renamed a channel in Teams? Yeah, don't do it. At all. It breaks. So there is a direct correlation between the channel name and the folder name inside of SharePoint. If you rename it in Teams, it will not rename it in SharePoint. Which means if you've got, hey, let's give people access to this through File Explorer, it doesn't change.
So you're going to have to buy an AvePoint or a ShareGate or your favorite migration tool, so that when you move from SharePoint on-prem or that file server and you want to start using the Teams folder structure and you want to move it to a folder inside of Teams, you cannot use the free SharePoint migration tool. There's no mapping to a folder, it will map to a document.
And that's the challenge. If you've already moved files into SharePoint because you've been a good corporate citizen, get current with better ways of working, and you've got your metadata, and then you say, great, we're going to roll out Teams. Start again. Has anybody just clicked upload from my computer into a channel? When you're adding a file in? Yep. So what that does is that sticks it into the root level of that channel. So if you've got a lovely folder structure underneath that channel, it doesn't care, it doesn't give you the option to do it. That's improving, that will improve at the moment, but for now what it just does is dumps it into the root level. So one of the challenges you then have with this is, well, hang on a sec, if I want the proper information architecture and I want it to sit in the right folder, then what I need to do is upload it to the right folder, maybe be it through File Explorer, and then go back to the conversation, and then instead of clicking upload from my computer, click browse Teams and channels, find the file, and then keep talking about it. What we've got is, how do you start working with some of this stuff? Because you can start working with a group before a team, and then you can add a team on top of it, but as I've said before, you've already got the structure, you've already got the planner that's in there, so now you have to start adding things to the team retroactively, or do you start working with the team first? And now because Daryl has his camera out, Teams is the best thing ever.
Because, yes, and Teams is actually just a user interface to Office 365 groups. So if you want to blame something, blame Exchange, because it's just the wrapper. Everything else exists to serve Office 365 groups. And I think it's important that we understand that. Don't slay, I did not slay Teams. But yeah.
When you delete a team, all of that goes. Because the problem is that they're actually connected to each other, but also not connected. So when you hit the archive button, what it does is effectively puts the team into read-only mode. Is that a continual loop?
It's your slides.
I know, it's just distracting me from the reflection. It puts the team into a read-only mode, but it puts the conversations into a read-only mode, and there's a checkbox to put the SharePoint site into a read-only mode. It doesn't put the mailbox into a read-only mode. It doesn't put the planner into a read-only mode, or anything else that's associated with it.
Like you would do normally with SharePoint, you'd start at the beginning and you'll go either create a site or a site collection or a document library. I don't know how you go about doing that. But notice we haven't once talked about content types for Teams.
Or document sets, or any other good bits.
Because they don't care, right? We only care about folders.
Files and folders.
Yeah. So you start with your membership provider, which is groups. You then look at the rest of the security that comes with that and what applications are available. Because Teams is not only the front end for Office 365 groups, but you can build applications on top of that. No document sets. You can still do that, but with Teams, it's about folders. And how do you logically draw out your information architecture. It's going to be at a 10,000 foot view. You're not going to drill down to content types and all of those crazy things. And that's just an opinion, because there is no referential proof that what we say today on the stage actually works, because there's no frame of reference.
Or it's still valid in 3 weeks.
Yeah. And then lastly, when we start looking at this, we talk about usage. How do you measure the usage of Teams? It's great to say that we've replaced Skype for business with Teams, but that's just for our users to make telephone calls. That's not usage. How do you measure? We talk about rinsing and repeating. And why do we want to do this? Because it's important to understand how people consume Teams. Information architecture and information architecture practitioners have been talking about logical structures for the longest time. With Teams, big departure, because it's about the conversation around the logical structure. It's no longer just, I've got a document library, I put a document in there, and navigably I can find it. It's really about how businesses work. So if you go chat to Kirsty McGraw and Tracy van der Schyff and a few of them, Daryl as well, almost about Daryl, around user adoption and ambassadors of change, Teams is right up there with changing the culture of the organization. Now, coming back to talking about replacing your intranet with Teams, think about it that way, right? The power that an owner in Teams yields when it comes to what happens inside a SharePoint. So it's worrisome for me that we have to look at that. But let's have a look at, and thank you to Matt Wayne for creating this wonderful graphic. If you don't know who he is, head over to Jump to 365 or app code.
Jump.to / 365.
It's too much. Just Google Jump to 365 and you'll actually see a really cool periodic table of Office 365, and this is one part of it. But everything. When you create a plan, when you create a SharePoint site, what gets created, when you create a stream group as well, and what happens when you create a team. So, for starters, yes, you get you get the SharePoint team site, which is a separate site collection that sits on top of the Office 365 group, which is the membership service. Let's also have a look at the technical considerations. So, does anyone want to take a stab at what happens when you create a team? Do you know? Or do you just see the name of the team come up and then there's a general channel? When you work with teams, it's not like SharePoint. SharePoint, you create a site collection and boom, presto, everything under that site collection is yours. This does not sit under that.
Does anybody have the internal struggles of what tool to use when? Yeah, so add to the mix of that, which group to use when? And then of course then there's the channel level, which channel to use when.
As much as we talked about Teams being the everything source, Teams is like any other product that you take on as an organization. And typically, you still need that. You still need change. You still need to understand how to roll out a product. Do not think that you can switch on Teams and tell everyone that they have Teams and everyone's going to. My mother, when we talk about my mother.
Think about if you want a nice steak, and I apologize to any vegetarians, vegans, airists, whatever in the room. But think about if you want a nice steak. Do you go to a pub and pay for nice, go to a steak restaurant, or you're going to cook it at home? You get a nice cut, you cook it, you prepare it, you plate up and all those kind of things. What happens if you go get a McCain's microwave meal and just chuck it in the microwave? That's effectively what doing Teams is like without any of these things. Just throwing it against people and saying, here you go, that's your McCain's microwave steak.
And there is no silver bullet to moving to Teams or trying to change the information architecture. It still applies, but understanding what Teams does, what the technical considerations behind Teams is, and understanding that you can still have some level of information architecture structure when building out your team so that you don't end up with 9,900 groups. Because imagine the administrator is, because it's not one person. Do you not input? Have you never input?
No.
Clearly you are not left-brained.
Does the picture work for anybody else?
There we go, thank you very much. I just one person. Just one person. If I can talk to one person with a picture, my job here is done. So, last but not least, because this slide will work, right? Okay, great. When the button works. I think that's it from us. Any closing thoughts from your side, Laurie?
I've waffled enough.
Thank you very much for spending time with us today. If you want to find us, hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Alistair Puget. You don't want to know what his Twitter handle is. It's the Cloud Mouth.